Sometimes success can't be measured in hardware. In the case of the subject of today's video, Wardlow's trophy case has yet to be filled, but he remains one of All Elite Wrestling's greatest success stories. Success in this regard isn't represented by kayfabe accolades, as aside from the 2022 Face of the Revolution ladder match, he really doesn't have any. Saying that Wardlow has been a success is not dependent on him having been multiple-time world champion, at least not yet, but rather Wardlow should be considered a success at this stage of his career because of a strongly executed storyline taking him from being a one-dimensional heavy for the biggest heel in the show to being one of the most organically popular characters in the whole company, all the while being booked in ways that best protect this rising star while managing to delay his ascent until the opportune moment. Oh, and this was done with a monster babyface. And if that sounds easier than your typical non-monster variety babyface, you think again. I'm Tempest hailing from partsFUNknown, and this is how AEW made Wardlow a perfect monster babyface. So for anyone unfamiliar with the ascent of Warren Wardlow, here's a quick roundup of everything you need to know. Vignettes air promoting the arrival of Wardlow, an unknown signing at the time. He debuts in November 2019 as the bodyguard of MJF, AEW's most despised heel, and does most of the boss's dirty work over the next 2 years. However, Wardlow was under contract with MJF rather than AEW, in kayfabe of course, not for realsies, a detail that would continue to burn Wardlow as he became more popular and began to talk back to his employer. Wardlow is involved in all of MJF's angles, joining the Inner Circle and forming the Pinnacle together before MJF assigns Shawn Spears to make sure Wardlow stays accountable. This is done to quell Wardlow's rise in popularity as he begins to feed off the crowd during his matches. Through weeks of well-paced teases and careful character progression, Wardlow finally stood up to MJF at Revolution, officially turning babyface before going on a dominant run as a killer of fellow monsters. It's more complicated than that, but those are the cliff notes. When you look at young William Wardlow, which wrestlers are the best comparables? In the modern age, I would have to say Goldberg and Batista. Big ass-kicking monsters who got over as strong babyfaces through long stretches of strong, consistent booking and presentation. But Wardlow is not a mirror image of either of these two, as will be evident as I use Gorg and Batista as sort of reference points for other examples of monster babyfaces working. And I would use more examples, but monsters are difficult to book, and there aren't many modern success stories of guys comparable to those I just mentioned. Big muscle guys like Batista and others couldn't quite get away with exchanging arm drags in the second match. It's going to be all or nothing, main event or bust, and because not everyone's going to be Dave Batista or Bill Goldberg and be even close to main event level talents, many of the big muscular guys who went through the top promotions in the United States failed. Folks like Ezekiel Jackson and Mason Ryan weren't going to reach the main event of WWE at the time they were introduced, and it's very difficult to take someone who looks like he has literal bowling balls for traps seriously when he's losing easily to undashing Cody Rhodes in 2011. And yes, I realize that it does sound a bit hypocritical saying losing to Cody is unbelievable here whilst in the middle of a video talking about Wardlow, but I promise you, it's different in his case. Woodrow Wardlow's first match was the super popular and super memorable cage match he and Cody had on Dynamite in 2020. If tasked with booking a new monster bodyguard's first match, most people would more than likely have that new monster win. But AEW instead chose to have Wardlow lose to Cody in his first match as part of Cody's list of stipulations he had to meet in order to meet MJF at Revolution. Why was this the correct approach? Well, for a few reasons, really. First of all, it fit the story they were telling for Cody and MJF, but it also removed the worry of needing to keep track of a winning streak. The winning streak gimmick is one of the simplest and most successful storylines in wrestling. The famous examples, of course, being Goldberg, The Undertaker, Asuka, hell, it even worked with Ryback. Ass-kicking wrestlers who have never lost, building to a big match with an opponent who rarely loses, is a solid booking philosophy. So why didn't AEW choose to do this with their new monster? Well, because the booking of a monster can get a little more complicated than you're looking for if you aren't looking to promote them to the main event in that given moment. In Wallace Wardlow's case, at the time of his first match in AEW, he probably wouldn't have been considered a main event caliber worker. So rather than be forced to build Wardlow into a world title contender due to the sheer number of consecutive wins he would amass over time, a position that he may not have been ready for and could potentially damage him from the audience's eyes if they're expecting a certain level of quality out of AEW World Championship matches, they nipped it in the bud. Cody beat him, and Wardlow was free to continue to improve without a forced push hanging over him. If you make a guy's entire character his winning streak, and he isn't really a good enough wrestler to be hanging with the top guys, and then you break his streak, well then he's just a bad wrestler with no character. You have Ryback. While I said earlier that Ryback's streak was successful, that really is more of a half-truth, as the success only relates to one pay-per-view when he challenged CM Punk for the WWE Championship at Hell in a Cell 2012 to a big buy rate. After he lost that match, he was never the same because he wasn't ready to be in that spot and he didn't have a character. I'm not saying that Wardlow would have turned out to be like Ryback by any means, but it is this drop-off in character that is avoided by booking with patience and restraint. This is what sort of separates Winston Wardlow from Goldberg to me. I don't know if Goldberg would work in today's day and age. Maybe he would. He's incredibly charismatic, and charisma goes a long way no matter what generation of wrestling we're in. But in-ring technique and overall work rate are definitely valued more today than they were when Gorg burst out of the WCW power plant. It's not like that's what killed him in WCW or anything, but it also isn't a stretch to say that there are many added risks when you push someone inexperienced into the spot with the brightest spotlight and the most intense pressure. Wardlow has had a Goldberg-esque presentation without a doubt. His name being conveniently 2 syllables makes that pretty easy to pick up on. It could be seen in his security escort from the back, his general badassery, and that aforementioned chant as Wardlow's career progressed and he became more and more popular. However, Wardlow can be set apart from Goldberg because of the choices made to give him more time before he would step into his increased role. It is very safe to say that Wardlow is a more polished performer these days than Goldberg was. Well, maybe that doesn't happen if Wardlow isn't given the chance to stand behind MJF and develop his skills for 2 years. Goldberg's iconic juggernaut run in WCW started with his very first appearance and his first match, and you were going to get whatever you got as a result. AEW instead chose to be patient, and in doing so they got to choose exactly when they wanted to pull the trigger on Wardlow's rise to the top, and did it when the big man had become pretty damn fun to watch. But let's go a bit deeper there, because choosing when to pull the trigger on a huge main event push is as important a moment in a new star's ascent as can be, and I find this to be the type of storyline that AEW really excels at telling. They will give you enough to satisfy your need for weekly plot advancement, because we've devolved into a society with the collective attention span of a goldfish, but they will save the payoff for the biggest possible moment, kinda like another big muscle man with a meteoric rise to the top of the wrestling business. I am not the first, nor will I be the last to make the comparison between Willis Wardlow and the biggest Dave to have ever been called Dave. Wardlow's rise in popularity, while part of the pinnacle, parallels the rise of Batista and Evolution almost perfectly. The story beats aren't going to be exactly the same because, well, MJF is not Triple H and he hasn't been holding on to the world title for the last 3 years, but it is the weekly progression leaving you feeling like you have to watch next week's show because maybe, just maybe, that's when Wardlow will finally have been pushed too far and will break MJF in 2. That is like one of my favorite feelings in pro wrestling. No, seriously, I think the Batista build to WrestleMania 21 is like maybe the most perfectly executed WrestleMania build ever. But anyway, back to the muscle man at hand, Wardlow's turn to the light was handled patiently over the course of years. For the most part, it was little teases here and there. Wardlow starting to roll his eyes when MJF would speak. MJF just routinely being a prick and knowing that this has to be leading to an ass kicking. These were the things that would tide fans over from week to week in between the major developments in the story. This, for those unfamiliar, is one of the ways to do long-term storytelling properly on weekly television. Those little moments, those are the moments that lengthen these stories and make it so you don't have to write major developments into them every week. It's subtle a lot of the time, and I enjoy my media with a bit of subtlety. But in Waylon Wardlow's case, this was a funny mix of a star very clearly having an orchestrated babyface turn and also getting over very organically because of the direction taken by AEW in this story. Wardlow is a big man who has always been able to do very impressive things, so it comes as no surprise that he would start to get cheered by the depressing tiny crowds of the pandemic era. However, while it was always clear that there would be potential for a huge babyface run from Wardlow, the action being taken to actually turn him face didn't start until much later. As part of the pinnacle with MJF, Jonathan Spears, and the BFFTR, Wardlow kept up his bodyguard duties with little change until MJF had Spears assigned to Wardlow as his accountability buddy at the end of October 2021. Now, why is it so hard to book a monster babyface? Well, to me, in order to be an effective babyface, you have to be able to draw sympathy. And I mean, that can be hard to do when your guy is huge and should kick the ass of most anyone they step to in a fair fight. Monster babyfaces can't get sympathy the same way as regular babyfaces. Even though I'm sure there are many monsters who are experts at the craft of selling, seeing monsters sell for long periods of time just because they're babyfaces can be very damaging. Not only because it sort of breaks the mystique of a wrestler who should be steamrolling people to see them unable to bust out of a rest hold, but because that's not what fans want to see. Like, picture this in your head. Close your eyes, picture this in your head. Baron Corbin has Rey Mysterio in a rest hold. Should be pretty easy to picture. It's what Baron Corbin does. That's a big dude crushing that little dude. I'm gonna cheer for the little dude. Now do me a favor and flip him. Now picture the little guy having the big guy in the rest hold and being meant to cheer for the big guy. I'm just not gonna cheer as hard. No one wants to see their favorite wrestler get beaten on, but there's an understanding when you watch Rey Mysterio matches that you may have to watch him come from behind to win. With someone like Wardlow, I don't want to see him sell. I want to see him kick ass, grind his opponents into dust, and mix them into his next protein shake. So because of that, you have to get sympathy on your monster outside of the ring. There are exceptions, of course. If you give him 10 lashes and kick him in the balls, he will feel it, and I will feel for him. But the sympathy earned by Weston Wardlow came through the mistreatment by heels over a long period of time, turning Wardlow from a pretty unlikable character that fans weren't intended to get behind into someone who you could not wait to break free from his contractual shackles. There was a steady stream of matches and segments used to slowly escalate Wardlow's rise, not only up the card, but in popularity as well. Wardlow begins to wrestle a style that of a babyface performer, introducing the Powerbomb Symphony, where he has fans chant for him to supply more bodily harm in the form of powerful bombs. Or maybe it's bombs that are full of power. I haven't really decided which. The audience engagement is worked in tandem with Shawn Spears, who reprimands Wardlow for not listening to him, which leads to bigger reactions for Wardlow as people wait for him to eat Shawn's head in one bite. Wardlow was getting over quickly, and then it was just a matter of keeping the audience watching until the moment to cash in your babyface turn in the bank contract. MJF cut Wardlow's pay on his birthday, caused him to lose his match against CM Punk, and slapped him across the face when he stepped out of line backstage. The build-up had reached gargantuan proportions just in time to give Wardlow the biggest win of his career and the biggest moment of his career in the same night. At Revolution 2022, Wardlow won the Face of the Revolution ladder match, the biggest accolade in his career thus far, and stood up to MJF during his dog collar match with CM Punk in a perfectly performed piece of theater. Warwick Wardlow's babyface turn with the ring may not reach quite the heights that Batista's legendary contract signing did, but the two make me feel very similar, and I have to give AEW credit. Wardlow crushing MJF in minutes at Double or Nothing was more exciting than Batista's WrestleMania main event with Triple H. It is so incredibly easy to blow off an angle at the drop of a hat whenever you change your mind, or you get impatient, or you want to capitalize on the current reactions of the audience, but to commit to a plan and stick to your guns is more difficult. However, it yields the best results as the longer the build-up, the bigger the reaction, so long as you have a satisfying conclusion. This is just a really well executed push. Wardlow has clearly been a project of Tony Khan and AEW's, and now you can really see the care and attention that has been put into making Wardlow a success. He came in a good-looking guy with potential, and not 3 years later he is a star because of his patient, long-term, consistent booking and the leaps forward he has taken as a performer. Wardlow's future looks very bright, and he steps into his singles future as the most promising monster babyface I can recall seeing since the notorious BIGDAVE. AEW has a real success story on their hands, and now it might be time for Wardlow to start filling up the trophy case.